Yay Networks.
Welcome to Greg Louganis is Alive, the podcast that challenges what you think you know. I'm Greg Louganis, your host, and yes, I'm still alive. I'm joined by my good friend and manager, Beth Zinman.
Hello, hello. I, for one, am so glad you're alive, and I'm pretty sure I speak for everybody else.
Right?
Yeah, you included, right? Yes, most
Sometimes.
days, right? Most days.
Yeah, most days, yeah.
So, Greg, I'm always happy to be here with you, and I am curious what is on the agenda today.
Well, I'm talking about remote viewing today, which I find fascinating.
Yay. That is a topic that I love and really love, like the broader umbrella that kind of sits under.
I mean, and I'm fascinated by it too, but it can be pretty confusing to me. You know, some people say ESP, some say paranormal, spiritual, metaphysical, but it's really the Claire stuff that kind of gets me, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because actually, like when you and I talk about this, you understand so much of this stuff. It's just, I think the labels that get assigned to things where it gets like kind of gray, right? Fuzzy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that I was fortunate to grow up in a family where these things were talked about and actually practiced a lot of this stuff. And I found that like people do get confused with that Claire, which just means clear, like it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
And like a lot of times you hear, I think the more common ones, clairsentient, which is feeling something that maybe you wouldn't like normally be feeling, something that doesn't necessarily belong to you. There's also being claircognizant. That's something I know you experience, actually probably both of these things. But that is like knowing something that maybe you wouldn't normally know, that's not necessarily in your wheelhouse, so to speak. But just kind of,
Right.
some people call that downloads, which I think is a funny term, but I get it, kind of a download, but it's like, and then with the remote viewing, that's really like clairvoyance. So it's being able to literally see things that aren't actually physically with you, but present someplace else.
Yeah, that's the thing that fascinates me, and because like, I mean, I've shared this with you before, but I mean, I had such a psychic connection to my mom, the mom who raised me, Frances. And I remember I was at college, University of Miami, and I just got this sense, this feeling. I had to call Mom. I knew something was up. And it was right before like I was coming home for Christmas for the holidays. And I just had to call her. And so I called her. I said, Mom, what's up? And she was like dancing around and not really, I knew she was upset. And, but I knew something was going on. And I pushed, and she said, well, I wasn't supposed to share this with you until after Christmas. We wanted to get through the holidays, but your father asked for a divorce. I'm like, oh, okay.
Uh-oh.
That's what it was, so I had to go through that entire Christmas, not letting on that I knew that they were divorcing, like I didn't have that information. So, but I mean, it was just a sense that I had, and it was just amazing.
We all can go through this. Like, I mean, I think pretty much everybody does, right? But we don't realize it. People make it out like to be this like magical experience, but we all can tap into this. I mean, you did it by accident, but it can be also a learned skill. But with that said, so tell me who's here today.
So today I'm speaking with international bestselling author, speaker, and educator, Dr. David Morehouse. He's trained tens of thousands in remote viewing protocol, which he learned in the military. Dr. Morehouse is a former U.S. Army Special Operations officer, and he's also authored 4 books, 3 nonfiction, 1 novel, and 2 which will be turned into a feature film. He's a PhD medical researcher and medical device engineer, and owns 2 training and research companies providing life-saving services to the U.S. government. And it's fascinating because I thought a lot of these talents you were born with, right? But that was the one thing that I found fascinating, is that protocol teaches the discipline to learn how to tap into that, which I think is amazing.
Me too. And confession, I thought I was born into that special family, but here everybody's got it.
Yeah. So stay tuned. It'll be a fascinating conversation with Dr. David Morehouse. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, Psychic Warrior, your books, and remote viewing. And, it used to be like, I thought you had to be blessed with, this gift, right? To be able to do that. But then in reading through your book, it's like anybody can learn if they have the determination and, just commitment, really. I mean, I found it's, that it's accessible to anybody, right? Is that
it absolutely is. You're correct. That was kind of the notion that everyone had back in the 70s, that you either had this or you didn't have it. And there may have, until really Psychic Warrior was written and kind of pulled the lid off the CIA's program, which they were not happy about.
I can imagine.
Yeah. They didn't want people to know some of the things that they had discovered. It was, I think, to kind of just shorten that part of the story, when Stanford Research Institute International in Palo Alto was given that sole source contract by the CIA to investigate this human ability, there were like 3 main deliverables. One was, can you absolutely scientifically prove whether clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, ESP is a human capability, yes or no? And then the second was, can you tell us what segment of the population would be good at this so that we can harvest them and then use them in an intelligence collection methodology? Like in those days, they were told that the Soviet Union and the Chinese were. And then thirdly was can you replicate this? Can you give us a training program? Well, the question you just asked was answered by Russell Targ, and it was probably one of the most poignant, most powerful things that came out of Stanford Research Institute International back in that time frame, which this would have been somewhere around 78, I guess, when this proclamation came out. And I don't even think, in retrospect, that Russell Targ, as a physicist, ever realized the impact of what he relayed back to the CIA. But paraphrasing it, through our experimentation, we've concluded that this is an ability not unique to anyone in particular. It is an inherent ability in all humans, And to master the skills, all that is needed is for them to put down their aversions to knowing what might be beyond the physical and to open themselves to the possibility that they can know that. That's a very powerful statement.
Yeah. Okay. So for listeners who may not know what remote viewing is or what that's, like, what is remote viewing?
Well, what it isn't, I guess would be the better way to start, is it does not fall under an umbrella concept. So remote viewing doesn't go up there with ESP or psychic ability or something like that. There's something like 72 real or perceived or professed human abilities that fall into the capstone of ESP. Remote viewing is just one of those. But you can't turn around and put shamanism under remote viewing. You can't turn around and put ayahuasca use under remote viewing, or, psilocybin, or you cannot say that transmediumship or claircognizance is remote viewing. It's not. Remote viewing was a very defined protocol, a dogma that was established in part by SRI International, but they didn't do necessarily a really good job at that. The person who really pulled forward the 6-stage coordinate remote viewing process was Ingo Swann, who was a Bowery artist, but also a natural gifted psychic. He was brought in as a test subject, but he also contributed very heavily to the development of the program. And then somewhere around circa 78, 79, the U.S. military, DOD, just picked him up and said, we will pay you to train teams for us. And he probably, based when I spent time with Ingo in the Bowery, he told me that he wouldn't tell me who all the teams were, but I'm certain just by listening to him that there was probably a CIA team. I hear that there was a Navy team, that there was an Air Force team, and an Army team. And of course, I was part of the Army team. And that Army team started off in INSCOM, but then was housed under the DIA, Directorate of Technology and Sciences, with oversight by the CIA. And so it was defined. It was defined as the learned ability to transcend space and time, to view persons, places, or things remote in space and time, and to gather and report intelligence information on the same. That's a pretty ominous perspective for it, but we have to agree that that's what it was. Its first intended purpose was. It was an intelligence collection methodology, one of many. I mean, now there's something like 32 different independent intelligence collection methodologies. Remote viewing was that. That's how the government saw it. Was it 100% accurate? Absolutely not. But was it accurate enough for it to hold its own amongst all the other intelligence collection methodologies, which they themselves were not 100% accurate? Absolutely. I mean, none of them are 100% accurate. Human intelligence, right. Signal intelligence, photo intelligence, electronic intelligence, none of them are 100% accurate. If anyone was, then all the rest would just be backup. And that's not how they're looked at. They're all just providers of pieces of information, individual collections of the overall puzzle for analysts to put together. So remote viewing was a powerful tool that held its own to a very high degree of accuracy, albeit never 100%. Never.
Right. Yeah. And the only way that it could be 100% is if you're there, physically and observing. And also, when you observe something, you bring your own perspective,
your own interpretations, right?
Yeah,
which is exactly why human intelligence is not considered 100% accurate, and certainly not one of the more reliable intel collection methodologies. And that means you've got somebody that a CIA case officer has convinced that it's in their best interest for money or something else to betray their own country And so then that person betrays their country and is essentially selling secrets to the United States through a case officer who's handling them. So it's never 100% accurate. And that's okay. If you understand that perspective, then just as you said, all of these things, no matter what they are, even if it's satellite imagery, it's still subject to human interpretation. It has to be looked at by human eyes, and human eyes determine what it is that they're seeing or not seeing. And therein lies the rub in everything that they do in intelligence collection.
You spoke a lot about, espionage, spy, all that stuff, in utilizing a tool like that. How can we use it in a positive way? How can we better humanity, through these tools?
That's an excellent question. And it is the only reason that I do what I do in terms of teaching it and talking about it today. I came out of a pretty solid background as a special operations infantry officer. Very successful, commanded an airborne rifle company, an airborne ranger company, an airborne battalion. Really felt like my life was on purpose and that I was exercising the exact calling in order to give relevance to that sense of purpose. But one of the things that I found in my life is that I was believing in a lot of different kinds of things. And believing is very simple. Everybody believes something. If you take a poll of the human population right now, which has been done by Pew Research, and there was one done by CNN, back in the 80s, the early 80s, and it's probably the simplest one to use, because the one that involved millions of people under the Pew Research didn't change significantly. But it said, out of 200 or 2,000 respondents, how many of you believe in something beyond the physical? 98% of the people who responded out of the 2,000 said, we believe in something beyond the physical. 2% of them said, we don't believe in anything beyond the physical. That statistical balance holds very true even to this day. The 98% were then asked the second question. If you believe in something beyond the physical, how many of you ever believe that you will in fact be able to connect with it, to interact with it, learn from it, contribute to it, something like that? Only 24% of that 98% came forward and said, we believe in something beyond the physical, and we believe that we have an ability to interact with it on some level. The other 76%, which is tragic to me, turned around and went, well, we believe that there was something beyond the physical. We just don't know what it is. And we don't really think that we, in our lifetime, will ever understand, certainly not interact with, contribute to, and learn from something beyond the physical. And that may be true if you just live your life following the guidance and the directions of the legions of the status quo, right? Telling you what you can do, what your capabilities are, what your capabilities are not, what you should be thinking about and not be thinking about, etc. If you journey forward and allow yourself to experience something through some training protocol, it doesn't have to be remote viewing. It could be something else, but it needs to be something that gives you empirical evidence of what we're saying you're capable of doing. If it only resorts or falls back onto or produces empirical evidence only, it's worthless to move you from believing to knowing. It only further reinforces the belief. You have to have empirical evidence. And that was the thing for me in remote viewing, because I went in with a science background, not as a person who claimed to have any ability whatsoever. I was the only combat arms officer ever brought into that program. I only intended to be there as long as the Army wanted me to be there, which turned out to be 3 years. I was not going to drop anchor and stay there for 10 years and 15 years, as some of my former colleagues did. Again, my purpose at that time was to be out and to command soldiers, to be with troops, to be with Rangers, to be with paratroopers, things like that. So I fought as a scientist, versed in physics and other things. I fought very hard against myself and what I was being asked to believe. You would go through an exercise, you would produce data. That data would then be given feedback, and you were then able to evaluate your data produced against quantifiable attributes relevant to a target. When you first start off doing that and you have a critical mind about it, it's easy for you to look at it and excuse it away as chance or my imagination or something else. But along about, the second month into the third month of doing this, you are working now in stage 2 and stage 3 targets, where the amount of empirical data that you are producing, data that can be measured against quantifiable target attributes, you reach a point where you can no longer talk your way out of it. Now, the empirical data is so overwhelming through the process where you start with no evidence, no knowledge of the target whatsoever. You're given 2 sets of 4 numbers. That's an hour-long discussion, so we don't even want to go there, but you're given 2 sets of 4 numbers, which are randomly assigned numbers representative of the concept of the target in the mind of the person assigning those numbers, which is the program manager, or it could be your training officer who's training you. But the amount of data, the sketches, the verbal and visual sensory data that you're producing, the colors, the textures, the temperatures, the taste, the sounds, the smells, the energy, the dimensionals, the intangibles, the emotionals, the aesthetics, drawings that are there of textures and of the geometry of elements of the target site. And then you get the feedback and you look at that and you can't quibble with it any longer. The day that happens, a switch is flipped in you, and you now go from believing that there's something beyond the physical and that maybe I might be able to interact with it. Maybe up to that point in my life, that had never been true. But now I know that there's something beyond the physical, and I know that I am connected to it. I know that I have always been connected to it. And as Targ said, we now know that this is an inherent human ability, which means that we've all been connected to it. We have just been trained to stop listening or to stop looking, but the ability is there. And once it's rekindled, once those conduits of consciousness or perception are opened up, you can't shut them off again.
I guess, and I don't know if I would call it remote viewing or, I just thought of it as like a connection. Because like I had the experience with my mother. I don't know, I was waiting at college, University of Miami, and she's in California. And it just, something kind of came to me. I had to call mom. And then I called her, and then she didn't want to share. It was right before Christmas, before I was coming home for Christmas. And she didn't want to share, but I pushed it. And as it turned out, she and my dad had decided to get a divorce. And so they were trying to get through Christmas without the kids knowing and all, but, she did confess to me, that was going on. But I mean, I've had a number of those incidences, where, I just thought of a random friend that I hadn't seen in years, gave him a call and said, "Oh my God, you called me at, the lowest point in my life." And, and I was, and he was in a really bad way. And that just turned things around for him, that he wasn't alone, because that is, with the isolation, depression, mental health, that's such a key, to realize you're not alone, but to have that kind of impulse, and, that's what I try and do is follow that intuition, follow that feeling sensation. If I get a feeling in my body, then, it's obviously telling me something. Not to say that it's remote viewing. I don't know what they're going through or anything like that, but there's like this kind of calling.
Yeah. That intuitive connection that you're talking about falls under this umbrella of ESP or clairvoyance or something like that. It wouldn't be remote viewing by its pure definition. Remote viewing, again, is this dogma. It's a protocol. It's a 6-stage process, or it's an extended remote viewing protocol that you learn, and it's a tool. It's like a hammer. I mean, it's just another tool in the tool bag. The important thing is that the reason you have these intuitive connections from a quantum mechanical perspective is because everything is energy, and therefore everything can be expressed as waveform on some level in the quantum world. And the way we define it is, again, just borrowing upon quantum mechanical interpretations, because that's all they are. And we take quantum mechanical interpretations and we slide them over and fit them into how we define the operation of quantum mind as interpretations again, which is perfectly fair. And any physicist working in those areas as experimental or theoretical will tell you that as long as you're not speaking in terms of absolutes, as long as you're speaking in terms of simple interpretations, you're fine from that particular field of science. Why? Because nothing that we can even develop a mathematical proof for in physics, that doesn't mean it will be right tomorrow. Tomorrow we might learn some new variable that fits into the equation that completely changes the equation. So everything in that world is an interpretation, and it's only right or solid right now. And it could change tomorrow. It could be complete BS a week from now. Something may change that. Well, what we're talking about in this 8-dimensional hyperspace, which that's another whole, that's another 4 hours to talk about that. But for listeners that are interested, just look up, Elizabeth Rauscher's writings on, 8-dimensional hyperspace and the speed of thought being faster than the cosmological constant of the speed of light, and others. There's just a whole lot of understanding about that now, which applies to what we're talking about here. At this level, you are omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and you are eternal. Why? Because waveform in 8-dimensional hyperspace travels by every possible path. It doesn't travel by any single path, every possible path. That means it's omnipresent. That means then access to information about a friend, about your mother, about a loved one, about something you sense is going wrong or something you sense is going to go right around the corner. You have access to the waveform expressions of those things, because defined very carefully as a human ability 2,700 years ago, the language of ancient Latin was created that used and developed these words: omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, eternal. That language was first ascribed to us as human beings. It was stolen from us by those who were putting it together to ascribe it to a deity or deities. It was taken away from the use as a human ability, and it was applied to something that we could not see or touch, but must accept on a basis of faith, of belief again, right? So knowing was stripped from us. The language that defined us and our interaction with the world around us and the cosmos the universe was taken from us for some other purpose. But that ability is you, Greg. That ability is everyone listening to that. You are omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. You are eternal. And that's what being connected to this piece of you beyond the physical, that thing that you have always been connected to, that thing that we were born into this life being connected to. The thing I've asked myself for decades is, if we were born, if this was instilled in us, an inherent ability gifted to us by the Creator or whatever put us here, even if you want to think that it might have been some genetic mutation or evolutionary byproduct where we develop these abilities, so be it. Why would that have happened? Whether you choose to turn around and say from a evolutionary perspective that we developed it, why did we develop it? But if you take it from it was bestowed upon us by a creator of some sort, then why were we gifted with these abilities? And why have we spent millennia trying to put our awareness of these abilities away, bury them somewhere so that, again, to use this term, the legions of the status quo and education, religion, colleagues and other things could turn around to you and say that doesn't exist. That's foolish of you to talk about those kinds of things. You having the courage to stand up and talk about these things as not only possibilities, but basically as promises to us within the global society, within the human condition, because they were inherently bestowed upon us. That's a powerful statement for people to realize, to go from believing to knowing, to trusting that still small voice inside them, because it's real. It's the unconscious mind and the conscious mind coming to an agreement about what is being detected, decoded, and objectified in the way of data. But remote viewing, again, that's just an old Intel collection tool. I like to use it because it's empirical, it's scientific, right? And I get good results with that with people because people step into it. They're learning something that they think is like a spy tool, which it was. So that part's real. But when they shift from believing to knowing, that's a big, powerful transformation. That's the most powerful transformation that I think most human beings can expect in a lifetime. At least that it was for me. It changed my life completely.
So often we're taught fear, we're taught limitations, we're taught, all of those things. And, and like we have to define everything and label things to try to make sense out of them when, you're limiting yourself.
Unfortunately, the world loves to tell us what we are not.
Yeah.
And start doing that almost as soon as we can recognize the fact that we are being fed spoon upon spoon of limitations of what we're not supposed to think we are and how we're supposed to live within the mold that is being set forward for us. And that happens from the earliest points of school. Unfortunately, sometimes parents contribute to that. Sometimes peers contribute to that. But certainly institutional learning and institutional faith have a tendency to strip that away from you.
So, David, where can people find your books and stay in touch with you?
I've written 4 books. Non-Lethal Weapons, War Without Death was my first book. And that is a book that was, when it was first published, recommended reading, later required reading at the U.S. Army War College. Really boring book. Nobody should ever buy that book. It's a textbook and it's extraordinarily boring. And then Psychic Warrior, which is now published in 16 languages, which go figure. It's, go figure. Something I write 16 language. That's pretty cool. And then my next book was a book called The Deceivers, which was about Torn Image, the strategic deception unit that I was in. And it's a fictional accounting of that, which I'm uncomfortable with. But Psychic Warrior is owned by Universal Pictures, and The Deceivers is owned by Paramount, with Mace Neufeld producing and Simon West supposed to be directing. And then the 4th book was Remote Viewing, the Complete User's Guide to Coordinate Remote Viewing, which is another textbook, 421 pages long. I mean, that's hard. So some woman did a review on Amazon of it, and she goes, her review was this: nothing should be this hard. Nothing should be this hard.
Anything that is so difficult is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Well, David, thank you so much for, shedding a light on this and sharing your story and journey. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you for joining us with that fascinating conversation with David Morehouse. Now, remember, subscribe and share this podcast with people that you care about. This is Greg Louganis is Alive. Namaste.
Yay Networks.